The cantankerous old man stumbled upon a stray cat on his porch, but when he discovered its backstory, everything changed. The morning sun stretched long shadows across the well-kept lawns of Elmwood Drive, a serene suburban street where life ambled along at a leisurely pace. In a modest two-story home with peeling blue paint, George Thompson, a retired veteran in his late 70s, began his day with the same meticulous routine he had followed for years. He awoke promptly at 6 a.m., the vintage alarm clock on his nightstand ringing insistently to rouse him. After a quick shower and a shave, he would make his way downstairs to the kitchen where he prepared his breakfast: 2 slices of whole wheat toast, a cup of black coffee, and a bowl of oatmeal. George was a man of simple pleasures, a creature of habit. His life revolved around the comforting familiarity of his home, daily strolls to the park, and the occasional trip to the local diner for a burger and fries. He wasn't one for socializing. In fact, he preferred his own company, finding peace in the solitude of his home. His neighbors referred to him as the grumpy old man of Elmwood Drive. Rarely did he smile. His face bore the marks of time and a lingering sadness that seemed to shadow him. He kept to himself, steering clear of small talk and politely turning down invitations to neighborhood gatherings. George's gruff demeanor was a protective barrier he had constructed over the years to shield himself from the pains and disappointments of life. He had witnessed too much, endured too many losses to allow anyone to get too close. His heart, once filled with warmth and laughter, had grown cold and hardened, much like a battlefield scarred by the ravages of war. One brisk autumn morning, as George sat on his porch sipping coffee and watching the leaves tumble from the old oak tree, in his yard, his solitude was disrupted by an unexpected visitor. A scruffy ginger cat with a playful glint in its emerald eyes emerged cautiously from the bushes. The cat was a pitiful sight, its fur tangled and dirty, ribs visible beneath its thin coat. It approached George's porch with hesitant curiosity, its tail flicking nervously as it sniffed the air. Startled by the sudden appearance of the feline intruder, George frowned and grumbled, "Shoo! Get out of here!" The cat, undeterred by his harsh tone, let out a soft meow and rubbed its head against his leg, as if begging for attention. George, a man who cherished his peace and quiet above all, was not amused. "I said shoo," he repeated, his voice rising. Yet the cat, with its inherent feline stubbornness, refused to budge. It plopped down on the porch, its eyes locked onto George with unwavering determination. George sighed, realizing this obstinate creature wasn't going anywhere. He decided to ignore it, hoping it would eventually lose interest and wander off. But the cat's presence became a constant distraction. He could feel its gaze on him, tracking his every move. He attempted to read the newspaper, but the cat's soft meows and persistent nudging against his leg made concentration impossible. "What do you want?" George grumbled, finally acknowledging the cat's presence. The cat, as if understanding his question, let out a plaintive meow and gazed up at him with its big, pleading eyes. Despite his gruff exterior, George felt a flicker of sympathy for the scrawny creature. He knew what it was like to feel alone and unwanted. Hesitantly, he reached out and stroked the cat's head. The cat purred in response, its body vibrating with contentment. Surprised by the warmth that spread through him at the cat's touch, George found himself smiling for the first time in ages. Perhaps, he thought, having a little company wouldn't be so terrible after all. The ginger cat, emboldened by George's unexpected affection, settled down on the porch as if it belonged there. George, still unsure about this new development, watched the cat with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. He had never considered himself a cat person. Dogs, with their loyalty and eagerness to please, were more his style. But there was something about this scruffy ginger cat that tugged at his heartstrings. Maybe it was the cat's persistence, its refusal to give up on him, or perhaps it was the way it looked at him with those big, trusting eyes, sensing the loneliness that lay beneath his gruff exterior. In the days that followed, the cat became a regular visitor to George's porch. Each morning, like clockwork, it would appear, meowing softly and rubbing against his legs. Despite his initial reluctance, George found himself anticipating these visits. He began leaving out a saucer of milk and some scraps of food, which the cat devoured eagerly. He was still uncertain about this unexpected companionship. After all, he had lived alone for so long, content in his solitude. Yet the cat's presence was gradually breaking down the walls he had built around himself. One afternoon, as George sat on his porch reading the newspaper, the cat leapt onto his lap, curling up into a ball and purring contentedly. Startled by the sudden weight, George almost pushed the cat away but hesitated, his hand hovering over the soft fur. He gently stroked the cat's back, feeling the warmth of its body against his hand. The cat purred louder, its rhythmic breathing lulling George into a sense of calm he hadn't experienced in years. To his surprise, he realized he was enjoying this, enjoying the company of this small, furry creature that had somehow found its way into his life. The following day, George visited the local pet store and bought a bag of cat food, a litter box, and a scratching post. He wasn't entirely sure why he was doing this, but it felt right. When he returned home, the cat greeted him at the door, meowing excitedly as if it sensed the gifts George had brought. He set up the litter box and scratching post in the spare bedroom, which had been unused for years. Pouring some cat food into a bowl, he watched as the cat ate with ravenous hunger. He noticed that the cat's ribs were less prominent now, its fur less matted. It was clear that the cat was beginning to thrive under his care. As the days turned into weeks, George and the cat settled into a comfortable routine. The cat, which George had started calling Rusty, spent its days exploring the house and yard, occasionally bringing George gifts in the form of dead leaves and the occasional unfortunate lizard. In return, George found himself talking to Rusty, sharing his thoughts and feelings as if the cat were an old friend. He confided in Rusty about his past, his regrets, and the loneliness that had haunted him for so long. Rusty, of course, didn't judge or offer advice. He simply listened, his presence a soothing balm to George's wounded soul. One evening, as George sat on the porch with Rusty curled up on his lap, he realized that something had changed. He no longer felt the same emptiness or ache in his heart. Rusty had filled a void he hadn't even realized existed. Looking down at the ginger cat, its eyes closed in peaceful slumber, a smile spread across his face. "You're all right, Rusty," he murmured, stroking the cat's soft fur. Rusty's presence had brought a whirlwind of change to George's structured life. The once immaculate house was now regularly adorned with cat hair, despite George's best efforts to keep up with the shedding. His quiet mornings were replaced by the insistent nudging of a furry head against his hand, demanding breakfast precisely at 6:01 a.m., a minute after George's own alarm. Newspapers were no longer safe havens for peaceful reading. They had become prime napping spots for a ginger cat who seemed to have an uncanny ability to find the most inconvenient place to curl up. George, the man of routine, found himself constantly adjusting and adapting to the whims of his feline housemate. He grumbled, complained, and even threatened to banish Rusty to the backyard on more than one occasion, but the threats were empty. His heart softened every time Rusty looked at him with those innocent green eyes. One rainy afternoon, as George sat by the window watching the downpour, Rusty jumped onto his lap, kneading his paws into George's legs and purring loudly. Lost in thought, George absent-mindedly stroked Rusty's fur, a sense of calm washing over him. He hadn't realized how much he had missed the simple act of touch, the comforting presence of another living being. Rusty, sensing George's mood, snuggled closer, his purring growing louder. "You know, Rusty," George said softly, "you're not so bad for a cat." In response, Rusty rubbed his head against George's chin, a gesture of affection that warmed the old man's heart. That evening, George found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He cooked a proper meal. He made a simple chicken, pot pie, recalling his late wife's recipe. As the aroma filled the house, a wave of nostalgia washed over him. He hadn't realized how much he missed the simple pleasures of cooking and sharing a meal with someone. Setting a place at the table for himself, he whimsically placed a small saucer of tuna on the floor for Rusty. As he ate, he watched Rusty devour the tuna with gusto, a sense of contentment settling over him. It wasn't the same as sharing a meal with his wife, but it was something, a start. The days continued to unfold, each bringing new surprises and challenges. Rusty, ever the adventurer, discovered the joys of climbing curtains, batting at hanging plants, and chasing imaginary foes around the house. George, in turn, found himself chasing Rusty down from the curtains, rescuing his plants from a furry whirlwind, and laughing at the cat's antics. He even began taking Rusty for walks in the park, much to the amusement of his neighbors. The grumpy old man of Elmwood Drive was now seen strolling along the pathways with a ginger cat trotting proudly by his side. He even started exchanging greetings with his neighbors, engaging in brief conversations about the weather, local news, and, of course, Rusty. Life, which had once felt stagnant and monotonous, was now filled with unexpected joy. Rusty, the persistent feline, had not only disrupted George's routine, but had also opened a door to a world of possibilities. A world where companionship, laughter, and even love were possible again. The crisp air of a December morning brought with it an unexpected challenge. George awoke to find Rusty missing. He searched the house, calling the cat's name, but there was no sign of the ginger feline. A knot of worry tightened in his chest. Rusty had never wandered off before. Bundling up in his warmest coat, he ventured out into the chilly morning, his heart pounding with a fear he hadn't felt in years. He searched the yard, neighboring gardens, and even the park, but Rusty was nowhere to be found. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow-dusted streets, George returned home, his hope dwindling with each passing hour. He slumped into his armchair, the silence of the house pressing down on him like a heavy weight. Just as despair threatened to engulf him, he heard a faint scratching sound coming from the back door. Rushing to open it, he found Rusty huddled on the doorstep, shivering, his fur matted with snow and a deep gash on his leg oozing blood. George's heart ached at the sight of the injured animal. He scooped Rusty up, cradling him close, and rushed inside. Gently cleaning the wound, his hands trembled with a mixture of fear and relief. He bandaged the injured leg, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man known for his gruff demeanor. Settling Rusty on a soft blanket near the fireplace, he kept a watchful eye on the cat throughout the night. He couldn't sleep, his mind filled with worry. He couldn't bear the thought of losing Rusty, this creature who had brought so much light into his life. The next morning, he took Rusty to the vet, his anxiety growing with each passing mile. The vet examined Rusty, assuring George that the injury wasn't serious. A few stitches, some antibiotics, and plenty of rest, and Rusty would be back to his mischievous self in no time. Relief washed over George, so profound that it surprised him. He hadn't realized how much he cared for this stray cat, how much Rusty had become a part of his life. As he drove home, Rusty curled up on his lap, purring softly. George made a silent promise. He would never let anything happen to Rusty. He would protect this creature, this furry companion who had shown him the true meaning of companionship. This moment of fear and vulnerability marked a turning point in George's life. It was as if a dam had burst within him, releasing a flood of emotions he had kept bottled up for years. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, a desire to connect, to care, to love. He realized that Rusty wasn't just a stray cat. He was a lifeline, a furry angel sent to heal his wounded soul. With Rusty on the mend, a comfortable rhythm settled over George's life. The days were no longer lonely, filled instead with the gentle companionship of the ginger cat. Rusty, true to the vet's prediction, recovered quickly, his energy returning in full force. He was a constant shadow, following George from room to room, curling up on his lap while he read, and helping with household chores by batting at dustpans and chasing after the vacuum cleaner. George embraced his role as caregiver, meticulously, cleaning Rusty's litter box, brushing his fur, and ensuring a steady supply of his favorite treats. He even started playing with Rusty, using a feather toy to entice the cat into playful chases around the living room. The sight of the grumpy, old man crawling on the floor, mimicking bird sounds, would have been unthinkable just a few months ago. One evening, as George sat by the fireplace with Rusty curled up on his lap, a wave of memories washed over him. He thought of his wife, Mary, her laughter echoing in the quiet corners of his mind. He remembered their cozy evenings by the fire, her head resting on his shoulder as they read books or listened to music. Mary had loved cats. He could almost see her now, her face lit up with joy as she cuddled a fluffy kitten. He had never understood her fondness for felines, finding them aloof and unpredictable. But now, with Rusty by his side, he was starting to see the appeal. He thought of his time in the army, the camaraderie, the shared experiences, the loss. He'd come back from the war a changed man, haunted by memories he couldn't escape. He had closed himself off from the world, convinced that he didn't deserve happiness, that he was destined to live out his days in solitude. But Rusty, with his unwavering affection and playful antics, had chipped away at the walls George had built around himself. He looked down at Rusty, his green eyes gleaming in the firelight, and a sense of gratitude washed over him. This stray cat, this unlikely companion, had given him a second chance at life, a chance to heal, to connect, to love again. The next day, George decided to visit the local library, a place he hadn't been to in years. He wanted to learn more about cats, their behavior, their needs. He wanted to be the best caregiver he could be for Rusty. As he browsed the shelves, he stumbled upon a book about pet therapy, the healing power of animals. He read about how animals could help people cope with stress, anxiety, and depression. He learned about the profound impact animals could have on human lives. A new thought took root in his mind. Perhaps Rusty wasn't just a companion. Perhaps he was a healer, a furry therapist sent to mend his broken heart. Leaving the library with a stack of books on cats, pet therapy, and animal behavior, George felt a sense of purpose fill him. He was no longer just a grumpy old man living out his days in quiet solitude. He was a caregiver, a friend, a companion, and he had Rusty to thank for it. Spring arrived, bringing a burst of new life to Elmwood Drive. The trees were adorned with fresh green leaves, flowers bloomed in vibrant colors, and the air was filled with the cheerful chirping of birds. Rusty, energized by the warmer weather, spent his days exploring the backyard, chasing butterflies and basking in the sun. George, watching Rusty frolic in the grass, felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. The dark clouds of his past seemed to have dissipated, replaced by a newfound lightness of being. He was content, happy even, a feeling he had thought was lost to him forever. One afternoon, as George was preparing dinner, he noticed Rusty behaving strangely. The cat was lethargic, refusing to eat, and his usually bright eyes seemed dull and listless. A wave of panic washed over George. He remembered the fear he had felt when Rusty had been injured. The thought of losing his furry companion was unbearable. He immediately called the vet, his voice trembling with anxiety. The vet advised him to bring Rusty in for a checkup, just to be safe. George, his heart pounding in his chest, gently placed Rusty in his carrier and rushed to the clinic. The waiting room was filled with anxious pet owners, their faces etched with worry. Surrounded by the sounds of whimpering dogs and meowing cats, George felt a sense of camaraderie with these strangers, united by their love for their animal companions. When it was Rusty's turn, the vet examined him thoroughly, his face creased in concentration. After what seemed like an eternity, he turned to George, a grave expression on his face. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "I'm afraid Rusty has developed a heart condition." George's world seemed to crumble around him. He couldn't lose. Rusty, not now. Not when he had finally found happiness again. He listened numbly as the vet explained the condition, the medication, and the lifestyle changes that would be necessary. He left the clinic with a heavy heart, Rusty curled up in his carrier, his breathing shallow and labored. The drive home was a blur, his mind swirling with a whirlwind of emotions. He felt a deep sense of injustice, a cruel twist of fate that threatened to snatch away the one source of joy in his life. As he carried Rusty into the house, a wave of determination washed over him. He wouldn't give up. He wouldn't let Rusty succumb to this illness. He would fight for him, care for him, love him unconditionally. He settled Rusty on his favorite blanket by the fireplace, administering the medication as instructed by the vet. That night, He spent hours watching over Rusty, his hand gently stroking the cat's fur, whispering words of comfort and reassurance. The next morning, Rusty seemed a little brighter, his breathing less labored. A glimmer of hope flickered in George's heart. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face it, for Rusty, for himself, for the bond they shared. This brush with loss brought a new level of depth to their relationship. It was a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the preciousness of each moment. George, once closed off and guarded, now embraced vulnerability, allowing himself to feel the full spectrum of emotions, from fear and despair to hope and love. He realized that Rusty wasn't just a companion, he was a teacher, guiding George on a journey of self-discovery and healing. The diagnosis of Rusty's heart condition cast a shadow over George's newfound happiness. He followed the vet's instructions meticulously, administering medication, monitoring Rusty's diet, and ensuring he got plenty of rest. He even converted the spare bedroom into a cat sanctuary, complete with a comfy bed, a scratching post, and a window perch with a view of the backyard. Despite his best efforts, Rusty's energy levels remained low. The once playful cat now spent most of his days napping, his purrs softer, his movements slower. George, his heart aching for his furry friend, felt a wave of helplessness wash over him. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch with Rusty curled up on his lap, George noticed Mrs. Henderson, his next-door neighbor, tending to her rose bushes. Mrs. Henderson, a kind-hearted widow in her late 60s, had always been friendly toward George despite his gruff demeanor. He had often seen her fussing over stray animals, leaving out food and water for them. On a whim, George decided to approach her. He hadn't spoken much to his neighbors since his return from the war, preferring to keep to himself. But now, faced with Rusty's illness, he felt a desperate need for connection, for someone to share his worries with. "Mrs. Henderson," he called out, his voice a bit rusty from disuse. She turned around, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Oh, hello, Mr. Thompson. How are you?" "I'm well," George stammered, feeling a bit awkward. "I was wondering, have you ever had a cat with a heart condition?" Mrs. Henderson's smile softened. "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Yes, I had a cat named Whiskers who developed a heart murmur a few years ago. It was a difficult time, but we managed to keep him comfortable for quite a while." George felt a glimmer of hope. "Do you have any advice? Anything I can do to help Rusty?" Mrs. Henderson spent the next hour sharing her experiences with George, offering tips on medication, diet, and creating a stress-free environment for Rusty. She even gave him the number of a specialist who had treated Whiskers. George listened intently, his heart filled with gratitude. He hadn't realized how much he needed this connection, this shared experience with someone who understood his worries. As he walked back home, a sense of community washed over him. He realized he wasn't alone in this. There were others who cared, who understood the bond between humans and animals. He decided to follow Mrs. Henderson's advice and scheduled an appointment with the specialist. He also started reaching out to other neighbors, sharing Rusty's story and seeking their support. To his surprise, the community rallied around him. People brought over homemade treats for Rusty, offered to help with errands, and even organized a get-well-soon card signing. George, overwhelmed by the outpouring of kindness, felt warmth spread through him, melting away the last vestiges of his isolation. He realized that Rusty wasn't just healing him, he was connecting him to the world, opening his heart to the kindness and compassion of others. The specialist confirmed Rusty's heart condition, but offered a glimmer of hope. With proper medication, a carefully monitored diet, and a stress-free environment, Rusty could still enjoy a good quality of life, albeit with some limitations. George clung to those words like a lifeline. He transformed his home into a haven for Rusty, eliminating any potential stressors. He replaced his old, noisy vacuum cleaner with a quieter model, invested in soft plush carpets to cushion Rusty's paws, and even started playing calming music throughout the day. He became a master chef of cat cuisine, preparing delicious and nutritious meals tailored to Rusty's specific needs. The community continued to rally around them. Mrs. Henderson brought over fresh catnip from her garden. Mr. Johnson, a retired veterinarian, offered to check on Rusty regularly, and the children from across the street would often stop by with handmade toys for Rusty. George, once a recluse, found himself becoming an integral part of the neighborhood. He started attending the monthly potluck dinners, sharing stories about Rusty and his wartime experiences. He even joined the local gardening club, discovering a newfound passion for cultivating roses, inspired by Mrs. Henderson's beautiful blooms. Despite his condition, Rusty seemed to thrive in this loving environment. His purrs grew stronger, his eyes regained their sparkle, and he even managed to engage in short bursts of playful energy, chasing after his favorite feather toy with renewed enthusiasm. One sunny afternoon, as George worked in his garden, he felt a familiar weight settle on his lap. Looking down, he saw Rusty curled up contentedly, basking in the warmth of the sun. A wave of emotion washed over him as he gently stroked Rusty's fur, marveling at the resilience of this creature who had brought so much light into his life. He realized that Rusty's illness, while a source of worry, had also been a catalyst for positive change. It had forced him to reach out, to connect, to open his heart to the world. He had found a community, a sense of belonging he had long yearned for. Looking around at his garden, the vibrant colors of the roses a testament to his newfound passion, a smile spread across his face. He was no longer just a grumpy old man living in a quiet suburban house. He was a gardener, a friend, a beloved member of a community, and he had Rusty to thank for it. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, George leaned back, Rusty purring softly on his lap. A sense of contentment settled over him. He had faced his fears, embraced his vulnerability, and discovered a love that transcended species. He had found his purpose, his place in the world, and he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with courage, with hope, with Rusty by his side. Summer descended upon Elmwood Drive, bringing with it lazy afternoons and warm evenings filled with the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. Rusty's health had stabilized, the medication working its magic. He was by no means cured, but he had regained a playful spark, chasing butterflies in the backyard, and demanding his daily dose of petting with insistent meows. George, watching Rusty bask in the sun, felt a wave of contentment wash over him. He had faced his fears, embraced his vulnerability, and found a love that transcended species. He had also found a community, a sense of belonging he had long yearned. For one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the porch, George sat with Rusty curled up on his lap, lost in thought. He reflected on his life, the choices he had made, the paths he had taken. He thought of his time in the army, the camaraderie, the shared experiences, the loss. He had come back from the war, a changed man, haunted by memories he couldn't escape. He had closed himself off from the world, convinced that he didn't deserve happiness, that he was destined to live out his days in solitude. He regretted those years of isolation, the missed opportunities for connection, for love, for laughter. He had wasted so much time trapped in his own bitterness and grief. But then Rusty had entered his life, a furry angel sent to heal his wounded soul. The cat's unwavering affection and playful antics had chipped away at the walls George had so carefully constructed. Rusty had forced him to open his heart, to confront his past, to embrace the present. He had shown him the true meaning of companionship and the healing power of love. George looked down at Rusty, his green eyes gleaming in the twilight, and a tear rolled down his cheek. "Thank you, Rusty," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for saving me." In response, Rusty nuzzled his head against George's hand, a silent understanding passing between them. George knew he couldn't change the past, but he could embrace the future. He would cherish every moment with Rusty, every purr, every playful chase, every cuddle. He would continue to nurture his friendships, reconnect with his family, and be an active member of his community. He would live his life with gratitude, with purpose, with love. He would honor Rusty's gift by embracing the joy and beauty that surrounded him. As the stars twinkled in the night sky, George closed his eyes, Rusty purring softly on his lap, and a sense of peace settled over him. He had found redemption, forgiveness, and a love that had transformed his life. He was no longer just a grumpy old man. He was a man filled with gratitude, hope, and a love that knew no bounds. Autumn returned to Elmwood Drive, painting the leaves in fiery hues of red, orange, and gold. The air grew crisp, a gentle reminder of the approaching winter. Rusty, now a senior cat himself, spent his days curled up by the fireplace, his purrs, a comforting symphony in the quiet house. George, watching the leaves fall from the old oak tree in his yard, felt a sense of peace he hadn't known was possible. He had come full circle, from a grumpy, isolated old man to a beloved member of a vibrant community. He had reconnected with his estranged daughter, their bonds strengthened by shared stories and laughter. He had become a regular at the local diner, his presence now met with warm smiles and friendly greetings. He had even started volunteering at the animal shelter, his gruff exterior softened by a gentle touch and a kind word for every abandoned creature. One chilly afternoon, as George was preparing a batch of his famous pumpkin spice cookies for the upcoming neighborhood bake sale, he noticed Rusty struggling to breathe. His heart ached at the sight of his furry friend in distress. He knew this day would come, but it didn't make it any easier. Gently scooping Rusty into his arms, he cradled him close and sat by the fireplace, the warmth of the flames casting a comforting glow. He stroked Rusty's fur, whispering words of love and gratitude. Rusty, his eyes half closed, purred weakly, nuzzling his head against George's hand, a silent understanding passing between them. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of pink and purple, Rusty took his last breath, his body going limp in George's arms. Tears streamed down George's face, a mixture of grief and gratitude. He held Rusty close, his heart heavy with loss, but also filled with a love that would never fade. He had lost his companion, his furry angel, but he had gained a lifetime of memories, a newfound appreciation for life, and a connection to his community that would forever sustain him. The next day, with a heavy heart but a resolute spirit, George buried Rusty in his favorite spot in the backyard, under the old oak tree where they had spent countless hours together. He placed a small headstone engraved with the words, "Rusty, my furry angel." As he stood by the grave, the community gathered around him, offering their condolences and sharing their own stories about Rusty. Mrs. Henderson brought a bouquet of roses, Mr. Johnson offered a comforting hand on his shoulder, and the children, from across the street, placed handmade drawings of Rusty on the grave. Surrounded by the warmth of his community, George felt a sense of peace washing over him. He knew Rusty would always be with him, in his heart, in his memories, in the kindness he showed to others. He had come full circle, from isolation to connection, from grumpiness to gratitude, from loss to love. He had learned the true meaning of companionship, the healing power of animals, and the importance of community. As he looked up at the sky, the sun breaking through the clouds, he knew that Rusty, his furry angel, would always be watching over him, reminding him to embrace life, to cherish every moment, and to never let his heart grow cold. Watch this heartwarming and emotional story that will restore your faith in kindness and the power of companionship. Will this grumpy old man open his heart to the feline visitor? Stay tuned to find out. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more touching stories. Share this video with someone who loves animals.